but it all means that local children have been there
Absolutely.
playing and learning and growing and becoming part of this new generation and thinking about their own lives and thinking about how they're going to be the ones that are inheriting and contributing to South Bend. I think the fact that has been happening on that block from 1890 through 2026. That's kind of incredible.
35 years, something like that. Wow. You heard that there. That's George Garner talking about a block of land and the 135 plus years that it's been serving a near West Side South Bend neighborhood. More of that later, but first, thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. My name is Matt Emery, and I'm a local history nerd. My main mission in this podcast, as well as other Round the Bend material, is to create engaging content that shares how intertwined the South Bend and Mishawaka area's past is to our present. In the podcast, I interview local leaders, business owners, and community members to help tell their stories, because their stories help tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. In this episode, I sit down once again with George Garner to explore another powerful site featured in South Bend's African American Landmark Tour and in his book, Placing History. This time, we're talking about a school, but not just any school. We're talking about Linden School, a place where education, neighborhood boundaries, civil rights activism, and the daily lives of children and families all collided in the 1960s. Because by the 1960s, Linden was nearly 100% African American, the results of decades of housing patterns and attendance boundaries that concentrated African American students all into one aging building. As the school itself began to crumble, frustrations mounted. NAACP activists pointed to Linden as clear evidence of segregation. Many Linden families, meanwhile, simply wanted a safe, new school for their children. All of that tension turned Linden into a defining flashpoint in South Bend's struggle for educational equity. George is the Assistant Director and Curator at Indiana University's South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center. As you heard in our last episode, George brings an incredible depth of knowledge and the ability to present it in a way that not only tells a story, but helps us grasp why it matters and how it fits into the larger arc of our community's history. And fittingly, we recorded this conversation inside another building with its own complicated history. The former Engman Natatorium, once a segregated municipal pool, now home to the Civil Rights Heritage Center. I want to thank the sponsors of this episode, the Portage Township Trustee's Office, and also Empty Box Computers. I truly, truly appreciate your support. Up next, my conversation with George Garner about Linden School. But before we get there, I included a short piece of our discussion on the powerful history tucked inside buildings that we often overlook. And then, just back to that building, it just reaffirms there's so much history right under our noses.
Right.
Here I am. I have walked, jogged everywhere, up and down these areas, taking pictures, researching, and before the African American tour with the tour bus, I didn't really know the depth of just that building. And right now, it just sits there.
That's one of the reasons we did that project was there are so many physical places that you could drive by and have no clue. And that's not a fault of any individual.
Of course
That's just a recognition that if there's no sign, if there's no marker, if there's no way to access this, how would anybody know some of the deep histories that have happened in some of these spaces? And so I'm really proud of this project because at least for the 17 that we've been able to mark, it's something.
That is cool. That is neat. And I will continue to spread the word. We're going to talk about Linden School today. For listeners who may not know where Linden School was at, can you start by just painting a picture of where it was located, what's there today?
Yeah, it was on the west side of South Bend, on the corner of Linden and Birdsell Streets. If anybody knows where the Martin Luther King Recreation Center was, but the current Dream Center is, basically the east side of the Dream Center butts up almost exactly to where the west-facing side of Linden was.
I see.
So right now, on a little bit east of the Dream Center, There's now a park playground.
Yeah.
That's basically where Linden School's at.
Okay, I got it. And the school was originally built in 1890. So we're talking, prior to 1900.
Yeah.
Those first few decades around the turn of the century, who was the school serving and what did the surrounding neighborhoods look like?
Yeah, so I know one thing we talked about last time was how the further west that you would have gone in South Bend in the 19th century, up until about the end of the 19th into the 20th century, just the physical environment was so different than what it became. The Kankakee River had flowed into the west side of South Bend at that point, and there was the area in the neighborhood that we now call the lake these days was actually a lake. It was a large lake, and so. It would have been really difficult to physically go much past, kind of Frankie's Barbecue was around the western terminus for a long time. But this is changing into the 20th century. So humans are radically altering the physical environment and changing a millennia of how nature had intended things in order for a new human-made and an industrial legacy after that. And so the Kankakee River had been drained, the marshes are gone, but now we're starting to see factories start to expand out there more. And so that means that more people are coming into the area to live there as well. And so what we're seeing is the west side start to expand with more people. And the north and west side in particular starting to become increasingly lived in by Eastern European immigrants who are working in a lot of those factories.
Okay, I gotcha. And so with the growth of industry, the growth of factories, obviously the growth of our neighborhoods.
Exactly.
You
need people to work those factories, and those people need a place to live. And so these become kind of working class neighborhoods.
And then moving forward, like to the 1920s, you do it's a fabulous job of telling Linden's story within the context of kind of the bigger picture of public schools at that time. And you made sure to note attendance laws and compulsory attendance laws, and moving the story of Linden further to the 1920s. What did attendance laws mean for African-American families when it came to schools like Linden?
We have to remember that compulsory attendance laws, to say just the idea that maybe children as young as 10 years old maybe shouldn't be risking their lives working in a factory.
Right. I don't mean to chuckle, but it makes
that
sense.
Seems like it should make sense to us, and yet that's not how people were always viewing that. And so the idea that maybe we should be protecting children from not working in factories, this is something that in the 19th into the 20th centuries becomes just more widespread. So what compulsory attendance laws means is that we're saying that at least to a certain point, children should be in school. There are things that they can and should be learning about reading, about writing, about math and science and all these things. We're starting to see this idea of public education really come into play. And I for one, happen to be of the opinion that is largely a good thing, that has done a mass good in terms of building a society that is educated and that is the next generation's workforce, right? And you asked how that helped or how that worked for African-American people in particular. It's the same thing. So we're seeing in the first decades of the 20th century, African-American people who had been mostly living in the U.S. South, who had been under the system of enslavement until the end of the Civil War. After the Civil War, the hope was that African-American people would become equal citizens. This is why we have the 14th and the 15th Amendments and even the 13th Amendment. This is how slavery becomes abolished legally, at least in most places, in most cases. This is how equal rights laws start to come into effect. And now just the idea of African Americans being able to vote. We're starting to try to say, at least in the 19th century, that this should be enshrined. That doesn't mean that people followed those laws. And so what happened in the South was not a new generation of freed African Americans who were considered equal citizens. What you see is this violent pushback. This is how organizations like the Ku Klux Klan begin. And they begin in order to try to reinforce this idea of white supremacy and a white racial caste system. And so the massive amount of violence and the massive amount of economic disenfranchisement that was happening, the lack of jobs, the lack of being able to just even own farmland. You might be renting to the system of sharecropping, where you might be renting to a white landowner and beholden to 90% more of what that farm was producing. This is creating this incredible push factor out. and African Americans start leaving the South in millions of numbers. It's between 4 to 6 million people who leave the South to go north.
Wild.
Between roughly World War I to about World War II and beyond. It's one of the largest movements of human beings in the history of Earth.
That's wild.
And northern industrial cities like ours become the recipient of those human beings and indelibly altered by those human beings because this is a place where African-American people can come and find work and start working in some of those factories. And so when those people are coming from the South to the North, and a lot of them that are bringing their families with them, that means there's a lot of children here as well. And those children, again, particularly with compulsory attendance laws, need to start going to school. And so we start to see our schools start to change as a result of this. And African-American children that are supposed to be given the right to an education alongside everyone else.
And you even, you had mentioned in there, like some of those compulsory attendance laws, like they forced them to attend a school that wasn't always peaches and cream and with caring and loving teachers there every day, but they were forced to go there.
When in the earliest of days, when it's a few African-American students that are trying to figure out how to exist in this predominantly white school, I think it's reasonable to say there's a lot of variation in the way that individuals were treated very greatly. But that also means that there are a lot of people who are not necessarily welcoming everyone with open arms. And so there's so many differences. There's racial differences. There's regional differences. There are
economic differences.
But it means that there's this group of students who are coming in, and at this point, exclusively white teachers. Who are not always receptive and not always treating every student with the equality and with the dignity and the humanity that they deserved.
We'll take a break here to thank one of our sponsors, the Portage Township Trustee Office. If you're not familiar with the work of the Trustee's Office, this is one of those local government offices that quietly but critically supports our community every single day. From emergency assistance and housing support to food programs and help for neighbors who are facing tough times, the Portage Township Trustee Office exists to make sure people don't fall through the cracks. Trustee Jason Critchlow and his team are consistently fighting for the needs of Portage Township residents. And it's not just talk, folks. Jason does a great job of helping us understand what's happening right now, what current events are actually affecting us locally, and what we can do about them. He's transparent, communicative, and deeply invested in educating the community he serves. What I especially appreciate about Jason is that he doesn't just stay local. He frequently travels to the State House to advocate directly for Portage Township residents, making sure our voices are heard at the state level. So if you or someone you know needs assistance, or if you simply want to better understand the resources available in our community, I encourage you to check out portagetownship.com or follow the Portage Township Trustee Office on Facebook. There's a ton of helpful and timely information there. A huge thanks to Jason and his entire team for the work that they do and for supporting Round the Bend now and then. Local stories and local services like this are what help keep our community strong. And kind of going forward in the story of Linden, leading into the 1930s and 40s, and it's pretty much along the lines of the Great Migration that you just talked about. You wrote in the book in the 30s and 40s that Linden's racial majority would soon suddenly flip. Talk more to some of the factors that led to this drastic shift in demographics.
It's World War II that supercharges the Great Migration. So all of these factories are now transitioning from building products for the home front into products for war. And these factories need workers. And African-American people become a huge portion of those workers. Now, it's interesting. Many other historians have noted America fought the world's greatest racist with a segregated army. But not only was the Army segregated abroad, so too largely was the work at home segregated as well. And it seems the South Bend Community School Corporation was intentionally drawing their boundary lines around each school to where African-American families live. This too supercharges a process where the schools become more and more segregated. And that's actually from an observation by Bernard Streets Jr. We talked in the last time that I was here from the West Side Recreation Club. Bernard Streets was the first African-American dentist in the city, and he had an office there. Well, his son, Bernard Streets Jr., went to Linden in the 1930s and the 1940s. And these are his words when he says that the student population during his time basically almost completely flipped. He said it was about 85% white, 15% African-American when he had first started. By the time he left, the exact opposite.
Flip-flop.
85% African-American, 15%.
And he said that was like just from kindergarten until his 8th grade.
I think it was 8th grade at that
something
point.
like that.
So he spent about 8 years in that school. So
And
roughly from the 1930s to the 1940s is when that flip happens.
And that's drastic as far as a school community's demographic shifting that fast. Normally, that's almost like it really happened in a vacuum. Like normally it doesn't. But I saw that and I was like, wow. And that leads into the 1940s and 50s where, I mean, segregation at Linden, it did not seem accidental. It just seemed more entrenched. And families were really starting to have concerns. Families were raising concerns with the school board, with the superintendent. What kinds of concerns were families and community members raising at that time?
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to see that stark a shift as accidental and just as a factor of where everybody's living. It's, there's some other evidence that tells us, Johnny lived next door to Davy. Well, Davy was going to one school and Johnny was going to another. It seems that the school corporation was really very finely tuning those lines to take a racial segregation pattern that was already there and amplify it that much further. And so by the 40s and the 50s, as it's now, Linden is at least 80-90% African-American, and the African-American student population is growing even further from there. And at the same time, the building is now roughly 60 years old, and the school corporation is not only choosing which schools to send majority African-American people to, they're also choosing which ones to invest in maintenance. And at this point, this is among the oldest of the buildings. The books that students were getting, they weren't just hand-me-downs. They were hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs. There was like 4 or 5 other schools that had this. And the students knew this. They could
They felt it.
And, they could see it. It had the stamps of all the schools that it was in beforehand. Students, I assume you do this to this day, but students still write in their books, assuming they still have books. I don't know.
It's pretty much all online.
I've been out of school for a while, so maybe this is passé now. But at least in my day, you'd write your name in the book the minute you got it, and you knew who had it beforehand and how many years that book was there. Well, the students at Linden knew exactly how they were being the last of the last. This was tangible proof, not only that they were not being prioritized, but being marginalized. They could see it with their own eyes.
And parents, a lot of parents were standing up for their kids, and they were wanting to talk to the principal, wanting to talk to the school board and the superintendent and all that stuff. It was around that same time, speaking of families, that several Linden families were pressuring the superintendent, Allen, to hire African-American teachers. Just from reading your writing, he didn't seem too resolute in this. He didn't seem too amped up, but in the 1950s, the district did hire its first 2 African-American teachers. You just want to talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah. Peggy Flowers Eskridge was one of the first 2. And this is a young woman who had earned both her bachelor's and master's degrees from Indiana University, had come back to South Bend. Linden had a playground, and they would sometimes let the playgrounds open for the summer for neighborhood children to play in. And she was very athletic herself, and so this was one of the things that she did, just to supervise the playground. So both between her familiarity with being in Linden already and her incredible and her educational experience as well, having earned these degrees, made her a logical choice to be one of the first teachers.
And you had written that it wasn't like it was front page of the newspaper. It was literally just her name. Their names were in a roster of the schools. Like it wasn't like a big deal at all.
Yeah, it just wasn't. It shows how.
Yes.
And I think the superintendent as well, and the way that he kind of maybe hemmed and hawed a little bit, or it shows the decisions that people make about how much are they valuing, how are they looking at their own organization and recognizing how it may or may not reflect their community as a whole.
Right.
And so organizations that do the best are often the ones that are looking at that.
Yeah.
How is your community as a whole? Is it largely reflective? Is it way far off? Kind of where are we on that? Well, and again, for the South Bend Community School Corporation at that time, to have so many African-American students and yet to have 0 African-American teachers, that feels really imbalanced to me. That's not just a little bit off. That's really far off. And so I think it's fair to issue some critiques against the superintendent for not recognizing that and not being more proactive against that. Why wasn't the superintendent more intentional about whom he was hiring and why he was hiring?
Right. And now, a brief word from one of our sponsors. Your business relies on technology, but technology needs protection. Our managed IT and cybersecurity services act like your own in-house security team, monitoring and defending your systems 24/7. We just don't fix problems, we prevent them. Local service, real experts, real security. Call MT Box Computers today at 574-277-2775 or head to their website to learn more, www.mtboxcomputers.com. A link to the website is in this episode's show notes. Thank you, MT Box Computers, for all of your support of our content. I'm so very appreciative and glad to spread the good word about your work. And now, back to the episode. One thing in my local history nerddom is I love to see how cities kind of evolve over the years and how neighborhoods evolve and how city blocks change and transform. And in the late 1950s, and then especially here in South Bend in the 60s and 70s, urban renewal was a big deal. And normally we think of urban renewal, we think of more downtown city blocks and more urban renewal development with businesses. However, in reading this, I had no clue that in the late 1950s, the Linden School neighborhood there was a plan for urban renewal, and it was homes, businesses, nearby structures, including Linden School, would have been replaced. You want to talk a little bit about that, or?
Yeah. So this was an attempt, at least by the city, to start thinking about what the housing structures looked like. So it's fair to acknowledge we just talked about the incredible change in population over the course of the 20th century, and a lot of the people that were coming in to work for war jobs. And so some of those houses were literally designed to only be
like temporary
for a couple of years. And some of these lasted well beyond a couple of years. Some of them lasted a couple of decades. So we're talking about homes that were well beyond, or structures at least, that were well beyond their original use, or some homes that might have been perfectly safe, might have been perfectly great, but maybe weren't as modern as some of the others. And there's a perception by some, including some that are living there, there's a perception by some that we need to have some kind of mass change in order to build more modern homes. The path that they went around it, though, or to do that, is one that didn't necessarily sit well with the neighborhood. And you really find this tension. You find this tension between folks who are living in the neighborhood, who know what they want and know what they need for the place that they're living in, for their community that they had grown up in, and in many cases paid for their homes already. Those homes were bought and paid for, versus a city government that was trying to impose this other structure that didn't fit that. So one of the ideas was, bring in private industry to raise all of to completely destroy all the homes that were there, which would literally tear down whole city blocks and then build something else that somebody else would then have to pay a mortgage for.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense to me that a lot of homeowners were like, I bought and paid for my house already. Why am I going to pay again?
Yes, exactly.
Why am I going to pay rent or to somebody or even pay another mortgage? That didn't make sense. Folks that were saying, you're literally going to be changing the entire face of my neighborhood and completely obliterating and destroying it. That didn't sit well. They were saying, have some lending programs so that we can fix some stuff up.
But not just big wholesale.
Not just whole,
Now, the neighbors ended up just causing an uproar, understandably, and the plan never really moved forward. But to me, the sad part of that was, I'm sure the families and the students, they wanted a new school building, and they didn't get it right there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it sets up this really interesting kind of three competing forces against each other. So on the one hand, you have a group of activists who are looking at this as an opportunity to try to build a new generation that would be more equal, more egalitarian, more diverse. And they feel we may not be able to build that in the society we have today, but we may be able to at least plant the seeds for that in the next generation. And schools become a focus of that activism in order to try to do that. And so there are a number of different plans that are floated around, some of them quite wild maybe by today's standards. There's one that I think you might appreciate. The idea was to turn maybe each school into just one grade.
Yes, I saw.
So every single South Bend student would go to just say measles school for 1 year. And then the next school they'd go to Navarre or however it was organized, right? But it has the advantage that it would be complete. It would 100% represent the entire city, quite literally. But at least, there's as difficult as maybe some of these plans were to implement, at least they're trying to think about
that's true.
How are we going to try to build a new generation from here that's not working through the same challenges that we are? That's a really fair thing to think about. A second force is parents that just want a safe building. There's the story in the book, and I presume fairly, particularly with your work in schools, that this impacted you as much as it impacted me. There's the story of the teacher who's in one of the basement classrooms in Linden. And
Miss Black is her name.
She hears some crackling in the ceiling and starts to see and looks up and sees that there's a crack forming in the ceiling. And amazingly, the students had just done their fire drill. I think it was the week before or something. I don't remember the exact details, but they had just finished that. So the students knew what to do because she says, everybody get out. And they all stand up and they all leave. And just as the last one left, the ceiling collapses on the desks. And there's a photo in the book from the South Bend Tribune that shows, it's a grainy photo and it's a little hard to make out, but it's very clear the principal, Ed Myers, who was the first African-American principal in a South Bend school, I should note, is touring the damage. And boy, if anybody had been sitting in one of those, it would have been an absolute tragedy more than just a collapsing building. We would have lost the lives of some of our school children. It's really hard to think about.
Tragic.
So it's also fair for parents who are saying, we don't have time to think about all this activism stuff and completely rethinking everything. We just need a new building.
Yes.
And also them saying, I don't care if the African-American student population is 90 or 12.
I want a new building.
We just need a new building. We just need to make sure that our kids are going somewhere safe. That is a fair impulse as well.
Yes.
So both of these competing forces are 100% correct. And then there's the third community school corporation who, as we've seen, maybe not had been as thinking widely about what does a diverse student body look like? What does our diverse student community look like? They maybe just kind of want to appease some white parents. And so I think the school corporation was a little more willing to lean into getting a new building, but that was also a huge expense, and how much did they want to pay for that? And yeah, these three forces just kind of keep competing against each other for years.
You called it a tug of war.
And it really was.
And it really is.
The unfortunate part of that tug of war is that it just kept dragging on year after year.
And me, being a school principal, I'm always thinking of the students and the families. And so this whole time, I just kept thinking of, my goodness, there is all this going on. These families and the kids are attending a school that's quite literally crumbling in front of their eyes. And just want to go somewhere and feel safe and feel loved, you know?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's fair.
what do you think when in Miss Black's classroom downstairs, that was kind of a kind of symbolism for the bigger picture of things, wasn't it? I mean,
it's hard not to look at that and see that this was
wow.
And had that not happened, or had there not been that major tragedy, who knows how
that's kind of what I'm saying. It was almost like,
but
reading that was almost the literal, I don't know, the straw that broke the camel's back, you know, and thankfully nobody got hurt from that. And then you mentioned the parents and the tug of war. That's just an impossible position for some of them. They want their kids to go to a school and be accepted, and they want their kids to go to a school that's safe. And I mean, it's a lot, man.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the plans the school district came up with. They came up with a plan called Copeland versus it was a lawsuit in 1961, Copeland versus the SBCSC, and it did end up, ending in a settlement, and the district presented a new redistricting plan. But the redistricting plan still, it wasn't, how can we put it? We still had schools that were completely 100% basically all white, like Clay and Jackson, right?
Yeah, it did not. It didn't meet what the activists were hoping.
Yes.
So at least in Linden's case, they did eventually shut it down.
Yeah.
And they built a brand new school, Kennedy School. And so Kennedy had merged from another school, Cayley School, that had shut down as well. But if my memory serves, I think the numbers of so by the time that we're talking about now in the late 1960s, Linden had grown to a 99.4% African American student population. Kennedy had about a 70%. So this is hardly the kind of
when they tore Cayley and built Kennedy, right? Yes.
So I think Kennedy opened, I think it might have been 72, 73. So that difference from 99.4 down to 70, that's still,
it didn't solve
it. I think the African American student population was about 15%. So we're still seeing a widely segregated school. If Bernard Streets talked about in the 1940s was 85% African American, well, 70 is not that much lower.
Right. No, it's not. It's not. No. If kind of in reflection, if someone would just stand, on Linden Avenue today, where Linden School once stood, and knows nothing about it, what would be some of the most important things that they should understand about the land and what happened there?
Yeah. Well, it shows how for over a century at this point, local children have been there. From its time as Linden School, and even through its time as the MLK Recreation Center. Granted, the building was on the other end of the block, but it was still part of the park.
Absolutely.
And now it's all part of the new Dream Center and a playground there. But it all means that local children have been there.
Absolutely.
Playing and learning and growing and becoming part of this new generation, and thinking about their own lives, and thinking about how they're going to be the ones that are inheriting and contributing to South Bend. I think the fact that has been happening on that block from 1890 through 2026, that's kind of incredible.
35 years, something like that. Wow. When you think of it in that manner, that's amazing. And they just built a beautiful Dream Center there now, and hopefully the land continues to serve the community for the next century.
Exactly.
So, hey, George, thank you for your time. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. This was wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. An extra special thanks to George Garner for your time, and more importantly, for your work towards keeping our community's history alive. Join us again next time as we learn more about South Bend and Mishawaka's Now and Then.